Hello, everybody, and welcome back to G-Bear's Off-Grid Ways. And I wasn't going to shoot a video tonight, but then it cooled down enough to come outside and actually survive. So sun's getting ready to go down here. I'm going to get in a quick one here for Helen Zoo. Okay, Helen is having a little problems with her Harbor Freight shallow well pump. So we're going to go in here through the shop and get over to the shallow well pump so I can explain a few things. And some of you other people out there new to the channel, and even the older people to the channel, might want to learn about some of this stuff. So let's get it going. Okay, so let me move this pipe. Here's my shallow well pump. Okay, now this pump is not designed to be just a transfer pump. It's not real good for irrigating your fields or filling a pond or anything like that, because this is designed for a well pump to give water to your house or cabin. And why is that a difference? Well, a transfer pump just automatically siphons water from wherever the source is and feeds it to another location. And it'll run as long as it needs to run until you flip the switch off and stop it from running. Okay? Now, a pressurized pump like this for a shallow well, and I'm not using this on a well, I'm using this on a water tank that I have out back, and this power applies pressure to the water for my cabin. Now, how do you get pressure? Now, she was concerned that no matter what she tried, she couldn't get the gauge down here to show any pressure. And then I heard people asking, how come only 23 psi of air goes in the back fitting of this tank here to provide 30 to 50 psi of water? Okay, so let's explain that first. First of all, the pressure tank is designed to create pressure for the water. All right, now the air is not the amount of water pressure you're going to get. The air is because inside of that metal tank, there's a rubber bladder. You can see the black line right there. Okay, that's the output side. Well, actually, input and output side of the rubber bladder that's inside there. And the bladder being like a giant, heavy-duty inner tube or balloon, whatever you want to call it. Now, the air valve that's on that side does not fill that rubber bladder with air. That's where people are confused. That does not fill the bladder with air. It fills the space between the bladder and the metal tank with air. And that applies squeezing pressure on that rubber bladder. Kind of like a turkey baster. You got that ball on the end. So when you squeeze it, it lets all the air out of the tube. You stick it in water and you release it, and it sucks water up into the tube. Then you squeeze it again, and how fast you squeeze it is how fast the water comes out. So the amount of pressure you put on it determines how much pressure you got coming out of the thing once it's full of liquid. That's what the bladder does. That's what the air valve does. Okay, so it only needs 23 was the original. Now they're recommending 25. So put 25 in it. You'll be fine. But don't think that you're going to put 45 or 50 psi in there to get 50 psi at your water pressure gauge. All right, because you're not going to get that. That air pressure has a little bit to do with the water pressure that you're getting, but the air pressure does not directly intermingle with the water. All it does is apply a squeezing force on a big rubber tube, a big rubber bulb inside of that tank. All right? So, that being explained and understood, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, on your gauge, I was asked how come it looks like it's full of gel or liquid. Well, that's to keep the parts inside from rusting. Okay, because if they rust, you're going to lose your pressure gauge and you won't know anything. Now, this little rubber thing on the top here, it doesn't say anything in the instructions when you buy this thing about it, but there's a little label right here. And I see if I can get in there close enough. And it says, after installation, cut off top of whatever it says. There's a little nub on the top there. You have to cut that off with a razor blade. Okay? That's so that air can get into the tank or into the valve, so when the air pressure or water pressure fills it up and releases it a bunch of times, it doesn't build up pressure inside of that meter. All right? So a lot of people don't know about that, and they don't cut that little nub off the top. Now, in order to get pressure to show up on that gauge, you're going to have water pressure in the tank, in the head, and in the pipes. The inlet pipe, which is there, and the outlet pipe here. You have to have pressure in all of them. You can't just stick a garden hose on there or whatever. It's got to be sealed. It's got to have some type of a sealant on the threads when you thread these items in. It's got to be soldered or glued together if you're using plastic pipe. You can't just put the pipes together manually and say, well, I want to use those again later. Forget it. You're not going to. If you're going to hook them up to the pump, they have to be glued. You have to have a sealed system. Okay? Now, coming in on the water line side, I have a check valve. Now, in a shallow well, they have a foot valve. It's the same thing. It's a check valve, but it's all the way down at the bottom of the pipe that goes in the well. And that pipe should never be on the bottom of the well. You go all the way to the bottom and you bring it up 3 feet, and that's where you should set it. Because if you put it all the way down low, what's going to happen is it's going to suck up all of the dirt and debris. Every time the pump turns on, it's going to cause a whoosh down in there and kick up dirt and debris, and you're going to suck that up into your foot valve or your check valve, and you're going to disable it. Okay? That valve has to be able to stop water from going back to the source. All right? If it's got dirt or grit it's stuck in between the little flap that's in there, it will not work. It will not seal. So instead of building up pressure, all you're doing is pushing pressure back down to the water source. So that's got to be clean and operating properly. If you're in a shallow well, the way you can find out if it is or not, this is your primer hole right here. So you can open that up, and this will not self-prime from a well to pump water up. It will self-prime from my water tank, because my water tank is higher than this pump. So the water is already coming down here, so I don't have to open that prime valve at all. But if you're coming out of a well, you have to open that up, and you have to keep pouring water in there, wait for it to go down, put more in, wait for it to go down. You have to fill the pipe up all the way down to your foot valve, and all the way back up to this point to where it's overflowing. Then you put that screw back, that nut back in there, the cap, and turn your pump on. If you have your faucets all turned off on the output side, it's going to start picking up water right away. It can't go out the pipe to your house, cabin, or hose or anything like that because all the valves are shut off. So all it's going to do is build up pressure between this valve and that check valve, and it's going to inflate it's going to fill up the bladder inside of there with water, and it'll press against the air, and the air is going to squeeze it, and then your gauge will come up and register. All right? That's the only way you're going to get pressure on it. All right? I hope that helps you. Helen, glue those pipes together. Make sure your check valve isn't full of trash. Make sure you went all the way down to the ground and then lifted your pipe back up about 2 or 3 feet. And then you should be able to pressurize. All right, now, if you're going to use that to fill your fish tank or your fish pond, as you said, you're going to listen to this thing cycle on and off over and over and over again. Now, I don't know if you're on grid or off grid. If you're on grid, it's going to use a lot of electricity doing that because this thing uses a lot of electricity to start, not to run. That's why you need a jet pump just for transferring water without a pressure tank. So you don't build up pressure in the tank and shut off. You just keep on pumping and pumping and pumping. What'll happen with this system is it'll fill up the tank, pressurize, shut off, turn back on immediately, put some water out, suck some water in, fill up, pressurize, shut off. So it'll be cycling on and off, on and off, on and off constantly. And every time it kicks on, your lights are going to dim because it takes that much juice to get this thing kicked over, even though it has a capacitor built on the motor to absorb some of that shock. It still draws like 12 amps of power just to kick on. All right? I hope that helps you, Helen. This is G Bear. Thank you all for joining me and signing off.